So good evening, everyone. We're off to a good start.
They're putting pressure on you, Rabbi, to make it interesting.
Yes,
To break them up.
thank you very much. I work well with pressure, thank God. This whole job is pressure. Tonight's shiur is based on this week's parashat Shofetim, and it's called The King and I. Becoming the king of I. Self-mastery, self-control. In this week's parasha, the opening of the parasha reads as follows. Shofetim v'shoterim titen lecha bechol she'arecha. You shall appoint judges and officers to all of your gates. And the Torah then concludes the pasuk, v'shafetu et ha'am mishpat tzedek, in order that you will then judge the nation justly. What is interesting to note is that this commandment is addressed to the community, and yet it's written in the singular. No doubt it is to the nation of Israel, that the nation of Israel should appoint just judges and officers to carry out the law. But nonetheless, the fact that it uses a singular expression is a point of great interest, to the extent that some commentaries suggest and say that this is not only a law or a teaching that relates to all of the Jewish people as one body, as one whole, but to every single individual. Shofetim v'shoterim titen lecha bechol she'arecha asher Hashem Elokecha noten lech. You should appoint judges and officers to yourself. What does it mean? It means to say that before we do anything, we must think, we must ascertain whether this is the right thing to do. And when we come to the conclusion that this is the right thing to do, we must then translate it into action. Because what does an officer do? An officer then guards the law, of which the lawmakers make, which the lawmakers enact laws, create laws, and the officers or the policemen ensure to enforce the law. So too with us. We must use proper discernment to come to the conclusion that our actions or our speech, our openings, our gates. So the sages say that your gates means your opening, where things come in and out. What is a gate? A gate is when people come in and out. Traditionally, the system of justice was established, or the judges were established in the gateways where people come and go, because that is where people traverse a lot. That is where occurs a lot of disputes and things of that nature. In order to be able to develop peace, judges were appointed there as well as in other places, but in the gates and the openings. But metaphorically, it refers to our openings. Our opening refers to our eyes, our mouth, our ears, by which they are the tools by which we absorb things, good things or bad things, and by which we emit things or make decisions how to act, how to behave. And therefore, the Hachamim tell us that you should appoint for yourself judges and come to the right conclusion of what you do, and then enact it. Officers means to say, ensure to enact upon it. You came to a conclusion. Quite often we know what's right, but we don't do what's right. Officers means to say, ensure. You find the way and the mechanism to ensure what's right. And as we mentioned on previous occasions, for example, in Shulchan Aruch it writes that, let's say a person has problems waking up in the morning, if he ensures, if he exerts himself 4 times in a row in succession, then it'll become much more easier for him to be able to get up in the morning. Or, for example, as we quoted on a previous week, Rabbi Elimelech Melezhenitz suggests, a great tzaddik suggests in his book, in his small little treatise, that if a person wants to eradicate a negative characteristic trait, let's say, for example, he becomes easily irritated or angered, 40 days he should work on himself consecutively to try and be more patient and not be easily angered, etc. And if you do it consecutively for 40 days, very good chances that you will be able to uproot or minimize So we have to find the mechanism, just like the police officers have the mechanism by which they enact the law, protect the people, so too we have to protect our lives. Our lives, our time that the Almighty has given us, and the tools, the eyes, the eyes to the world, to be able to see and to be able to understand things, and the mouth, which is a great tool, and the ears, what we hear and what we choose to hear. We have to be able to find the mechanism, how to ensure that they are protected, and that everything that we've come to the conclusion with our mind will be properly enacted and protected. This is one way of looking at things. The other way of looking at things is before we judge others, we first have to judge ourselves. If you want to be able for there to be proper justice, proper equality, for there to be peace amongst people, amongst communities, amongst the world, first judge yourself. And when we see that we judge ourselves and we see how imperfect we are, because the human nature is we judge others, and we don't judge others by the same yardstick and barometers we do ourselves. We're always much more harsher on people than we are on ourselves. But if we were to judge others as favorably as we judge ourselves, then the end result would be v'shaftu et ha'am mishpat tzedek. Then you will come to judge people not harshly but righteously, properly. So first judge yourself. In this vein, just incidentally, by the way, very interesting to this, it says, further to this, lo tikach shohad. Do not take a bribe. A judge is not permitted to take a bribe, because if you take a bribe, it'll even subconsciously taint you. It'll taint your decision-making. A person, now we hear about all of this this commission that's going on with the with the taking of money for the purposes of advertising in the news. And what did they do wrong? They took the money to advertise, to promote their party, after all. But the person who gave the money, he had a vested interest. The vested interest is when you get into power, I scratched your back, then you scratch my back, and then the decision that you will make will not be necessarily for the benefit of the community or for the council, will be for the benefit of that the donor, or what are they? What were they? They were, a lot of them were builders. What were they? They were developers. They want their development approved. So they gave donations in the hope that you get into power, the development improvement. To them it means hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. So it taints you. It doesn't allow you to come to the right conclusion. So too spiritually. When we take bribery, it blinds a person. When we are bribed by our own love for ourselves, our own respect for ourselves, that's a form of bribery. We become tainted. We're not able to come to the right conclusions, and we're not able to enact what we need to do. We have to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what I did today wasn't right, and I'm going to change that, and I'm going to do everything possible to enact that, to put in place the mechanism to be able to change that. But if I look myself in the mirror and I said, it wasn't so bad what I did today, I had a bad day, I'm entitled to have a bad day, right? Or, that guy, he deserved it. He really did deserve it, notwithstanding the fact that he may have deserved it. And of course, from our perspective, that Mamzer always deserved it. But notwithstanding that, we don't ever reach perfection or anywhere near perfection with that attitude. So if we take bribes, if we bribe ourselves, we will never come to the right conclusion. What's very, very interesting is if you take the word lo tikach shohad, do not take a bribe. Have a look at the last letter of each word. Lo, what's the last letter of lo? Aleph. Tikach, het. Shohad, daled. What does it spell? Ehad. Which means if a person doesn't take bribes, you come to be one with yourself, and you come to be one with your fellow. You will know how to judge yourself properly and be able to reveal the one within yourself. You'll be one, you'll be complete with yourself, with others, and with God. When you're not tainted, you're able to reveal and see the godliness in everything, the one God in everything and in everyone. But if you consistently bribe yourself, if you consistently justify everything that you do, you will never find the one God within you and within your neighbor. in this vein, really the truth is the shiur was not about this. It was just an introduction to the next pasuk that I want to speak about. The next pasuk that I want to speak about is Som Tasim Alecha Melech. We have a command that when the Jewish people enter the land of Israel, they are to coronate a king, to place a king upon themselves. That the king will show them they had to respect authority and will show them the path, will lead them, will galvanize them, will unite them under the banner of God and will lead them properly. And by seeing, everything there are many things in this world that has what's called correspondence. Correspondence means to say that when you do an action below, you arouse an action up above. You do a correspondent action. It's called taruta deletata. In Kabbalistic terminology, it's called taruta deletata, taruta dele'ela. When you arouse yourself from below, you make an arousal from above. When we learn how to have a proper and healthy Torah perspective to a king and understand the authority of the king, we begin to appreciate the King of all kings. Those who've read stories in history, especially Jewish history, know of the many, many stories by which the leaders of the Jewish people were called upon or needed to intervene on behalf of their brethren to go before kings and to beseech them to nullify decrees. Many, many such stories that I read when I was young. And the description they describe standing before the king and beforehand praying to God that they'll find the right words to be able to supplicate the king, and how their knees knocked and they stood before an all-powerful king that can sever their head in a moment, was very interesting to me as a youth, as a young boy, and of course arouses your imagination. When I was in Russia, I went to Leningrad. What's it called today? Stalingrad, no? Oh, it was back to Stalingrad. I'll check tomorrow in the papers whether it was. They decided finally what it is. St. Petersburg, yeah. So, when I was there, I think it was called Leningrad. Yeah, it was Leningrad when I was there. And although we didn't have much time for touring because we were teaching a lot when we were in Russia. But when I was in Leningrad, we did do a little bit of touring. We saw the beautiful, magnificent synagogue that they had there. It's just gorgeous. And what was very interesting was, I remember my grandfather, Alav Shalom, he used to have snuff, tabak. He used to sniff tabak. His handkerchief was always brown, and his fingers was always brown, and I never appreciated the beauty of tabak. What do they call it? What's it called? Snuff. So nobody does it today, but nobody does it today. Anyway, it was very cold in Russia when we were there, and I had a cold and I was congested. And I come to the synagogue. They have a massive, beautiful synagogue, and then they have like a little synagogue for like daily prayers or where they hold chupot or these type of things. Very, very nice. What do I see on the bima, on the teva, as a fixture? A little box. I open the box. What's that? What's this? Oh, snuff. And you know what? I said, I'm going to try this stuff. So I take it and I put it in snuff, and I tell you what, it cleared the sinuses, it cleared the blockages of the nose. It was very, very interesting. So one of the things that I really wanted to see in Leningrad, I like architecture at the best of times, but there's one thing that I really want to see for historical purpose, for perhaps nostalgia of all of the stories that I read as a child, and you don't have this today, is the palace. In Leningrad, they have a famed palace, a beautiful palace, and it was very beautiful to see. It was very nice to go through the rooms. But there was one thing. Sorry?
The Hermitage.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah. I'm telling you, actually, someone a while ago sent me this magnificent thing on Leningrad.
It rings a bell. That name rings a bell. I specifically wanted to see the throne room. I wanted to see what was it like to enter a throne room. What's a throne room? I've never been in a throne room. I only imagined in my mind. And I remember the stories as a child of what went on when people went before the king and how afraid they were. And I wanted to feel that a little bit. So I went to the throne room, and in fact it aroused within me an imagination of fear. There was no king there at the time, but I could imagine. I saw the throne. It was magnificent. It was big, and I envisioned the king sitting there, and I'm there as a helpless serf, asking for more time to pay my rent for the land that the king has so generously allowed me, and there was no rains this year, and I'm just imagining myself pleading before the king, and the awe and the fear and the trembling. Malchuta de'ara ke'en malchuta derakia. The sages tell us the kingdom of earth is similar, is akin to the kingdom of heaven. So when you have a king, it allows us to imagine and to understand a little bit and to correspond it in spiritual terms. What is the King of all kings? A little bit, an idea. Som tasim alecha melech. The Torah commands us, coronate a king. Place a king upon you, and he shall lead you, and he shall galvanize you, and he shall unite you under the banner of godliness and of spirituality. Having said that, we of course no longer have the mitzvah of appointing a king, because we are still considered in exile. And even though we may live in the land of Israel, or hope to live in the land of Israel, or visiting the land of Israel, or those who are living in the land of Israel, we're still considered in exile. And the command of appointing a king is not as relevant as it was then. What happens in times when we live in different countries where certain commandments seem physically irrelevant? The sages tell us that every commandment has a spiritual dimension that exists in all times that we must learn from. And therefore, the practical application of the king is what we spoke about. But there has to be a spiritual dimension of appointing a king. In light of what we said before about Shofetim v'Shotrim titen lecha, appoint for yourself judges and officers in order to enact and to administer justice, the same would apply for the king. Because here the Torah uses again a singular expression. Som tasim alecha melech. Place upon yourself the individual. Alecha in Hebrew is not alechem. Alechem is all of you, plural. We don't have it in English. But in Hebrew, alecha is the individual. So the Torah tells us not only as a nation, as a unit, we have to appoint ourselves a king, but also as an individual, we have to appoint ourselves a king over ourselves. Be king over ourselves. That's what the Torah wants us to do. To have mastery and self-control. In this light and in this vein, I would like then to speak about the spiritual dimension of what a king is. And it's as follows. The Almighty God created the human being, aside from giving him a body and aside from breathing within him the breath of life, the soul, the neshama. He also endowed him with particular qualities that are divided generally into three. Mahshava, thought, speech or emotion, and we will correlate them in a minute, and ma'aseh, and action. These are the three dimensions by which we express ourselves. Thought is predominantly to us. It's very much unified with us. Speech is to others. Emotion is to others. You express your emotions to others. Love, anger, frustration, disappointment. And action. These are the three ways we express ourselves. Mahshaba, that's of course in the brain, in the moah. Dibur speech is very much associated with emotions or a desire to do good, for example, a desire to do bad, an emotion to want to do good, an emotion to want to do bad. Speech is very much related to it because the sages tell us that the heart, which is the seat of emotion, unlike the thought, which is rooted in the brain, the physical dimension of emotion is in the heart. The heart also creates or is associated with the breathing apparatus. It creates heat in the breath. That's number one. Number two, it's interesting to note the inner connection, the intrinsic connection between speech and emotion. When a person speaks about how someone upset him, what happens? What happens? You get more upset. What happens if one of your children did something wrong? And you're upset, but what happens when you speak to him about it? Him, notice I said him. My girls, they do never anything wrong. The boys, they're the troublemakers. God forbid. I pay attention to myself. When I speak to my children about something that they did that annoyed me or whatever, it annoys me more. I get more upset about it. And it's interesting to note that if you hold yourself back and don't react straight away, so there is a division between the emotion and the speech, and thus it's not affected as much. But you can re-arouse it by speaking about it. An emotion that was buried or forgotten can be totally re-aroused. So there is a very inner connection between speech and emotion, and they are related to the heart. And then we have the more physical part of us. What is the most physical dimensional part of us according to the Torah? That is the kaved, the liver. Why? Because ki hadam hu hanefesh. Are we allowed to eat blood of an animal? Why? Because the blood represents its very life source, its essence of life. The flesh is its external part. You can eat the flesh, but the life, have a bit of respect. Don't eat the blood. Don't eat the life. You got this over there, this space over there, like, you're imagining or not. Don't worry, I'm not suggesting for you to have blood or try it or taste it or whatever. It's the core and essence of our life. It's the most basic ingredient of the physical part of who we are and what we are. Ki hadam hu hanefesh. The nefesh is the blood. And that represents the more physical dimension of us. Similarly, these three parts correspond to the three parts of the soul that are enclosed within the body. There are 5 parts. According to one place in the Zohar, it says 4 parts of the soul, but it doesn't speak about the other one in that particular place. According to the Midrash says that there are 5 parts of the soul, but basically, all agree that there are 5 parts of the soul. Depends on what level or what dimension of the soul he's speaking about. 3 of those dimensions of the soul are enclosed within the body, one higher than the other. The highest part is what's called neshama, or breath. That is when God blew within his nostrils the breath of life. Neshima. Neshima means breath. Vayipah ba'apav nishmat hayim. He blew within his nostrils the breath of life. That is the highest part of the soul that is associated with the body. There are other parts that are not enclosed in the body. They are much higher, and this we've spoken about in different times, and I also am going to speak about a little bit in one of the shiurim prior to Rosh Hashanah. The seat or the place where this neshama is most expressed or exists, so to speak, is in the brain. Just like the brain controls the whole body, the neshama is the central nervous system of all spirituality, even the lowest levels of spirituality. And that's why it's in the brain. And the brain, we are born with a natural ability that the brain controls the emotions, the heart. Moach shalit al halev beteva toldotav. A person was born with the inherent ability that the mind comes to a conclusion of what's right and translates it and can control his emotions if he so desires and wills it. Therefore, the most holiest part, the greatest part of the neshama that is enclosed within the body is in the brain. The brain is the most purest, the most highest, the most noblest of the human being. And for this reason, the brain, the mind, the thought is the most noble. It's the greatest part of who we are and what we are. But it does not necessarily define man, because we find that man is defined by his ability to speak and communicate, which is related to the next part, that is the heart, or the emotions, or speech, or one's desires, one's will. The next part of the neshama resides within the heart, and that's called ruach, the spirit. The spirit. That is not as noble, not as high, not as spiritual as neshama, so it resides a step down. But it's still much more spiritual than the next level down, because it is associated with breath. It is connected to the mechanism of breath, of the ma'arechet haneshima, of the faculties of breath. As I said, it's responsible for the heat, for the hevel piv, the hevel of dibur, the breath of speech, the heat to speech comes from the heart. What's the lowest level? The nefesh. What did we say before? Ki hadam hu hanefesh. The most basic spiritual component, the lowest spiritual component to who we are is life. Just simple life, the ability to move, the ability to live. That is also a spiritual entity, a spiritual concept. For what differentiates between a living body and a dead body that is 100% functioning, all of the organs function so beautifully and perfectly, and nothing wrong with it, yet the person may have passed away, God forbid. The fact that the soul left the body. That is the cause of death. When God decides that the soul leaves the body. How many people who are sick, extremely sick, and have this problem and that problem, God forbid, lo alenu, and this sickness and that sickness, they're alive, they're living, they're kicking. Because God decided that they are to live. Yet you think any moment, they're living, they're fine. And I see this time and again. Yet you find many times healthy people, everything's fine, everything's functioning. They passed away. Sometimes they can't even guess why they passed away, and God forbid they order an autopsy of these type of things. Very simple. The nefesh, that part of us, that part of the soul that animates the body, has now left the body. Has now left the body. And what did we say before? Ki hadam hu hanefesh. The blood is the living soul. The living soul then gets enclosed where? In the liver. What does the liver do? It refines the blood. It deals with the most basic ingredient of our life. Take away the blood, we don't live.
Probably you mean the kidney.
Kaved. No, not the kidney, the kaved, because the kaved still synthesizes, still is associated with the blood. Yes. Okay, let's continue. So we have these three parts of the soul. The nefesh, that is associated with the kaved, the liver. The liver is intimately associated with the blood, the very basic ingredients of life, but it is the most physical. It is the most physical it interacts with the most physical, thus it represents the lowest part of us, the most physical part of us, that part of action, animation, moving, life. How do you differentiate between a living person, not living person? The ability to move, to interact. That's alive, moving. Then a bit higher than that, to feel, to express emotions, desires, to have she'ifot, ambitions, to desire this, to desire that, to desire to make an imprint on this world, to make a difference in the world, to desire, God forbid, bad things, to desire what another person has, to be able to enact upon it and to take it away from him, to desire to express anger or hatred or punish and suffering upon others. There is such desires. There are people who have such desires. That is in the heart. That is associated with ruach, with the spirit. The nefesh being the soul, just the living soul. I know in English we translate the neshama as the soul, but that's the living soul. Nefesh is the living soul. Then we have the ruach, the spirit that's associated with emotions, will, desire, speech, be able to communicate. And then the neshama, the most holiest, the most pristine, the purest, it's in the brain. The brain has control over everything. The brain can control what mood you're in if you want to. The brain can decide that's not a very good thing to desire at all. We'll get rid of that. We'll change that. We won't enact upon that. We won't do that, etc., etc., etc. When the Almighty said, "V'hitim li segula mikol ha'amim," you shall be for me a chosen nation, a jewel, a special nation. The word segula means a treasure, but it also is connected to the word segol, the pronunciation of the nikud. How do you say nikud in English again? The vowel, sorry. The vowel of segol, the S sound, is 3 dots. So treasure, to be a treasure, to be treasured by God, is someone that has control over these 3 faculties. And now let's take this a step further. So these 3 faculties, if we were to write them on the board, Mem for Moach, Lamed for Lev, and Chaf for Kaved. What does it spell? Melech, king. To be a king over oneself is to master, control, to exercise control over our thoughts, over our speech and our emotions, our desires, our aspirations. And the basic life, action, animation, movement, what we do in life. Som tasim alecha melech. The Torah tells us, commands us, place for yourself a melech, appoint for yourself a melech. Be a king, be in charge. And how do you become in charge? How do you become a king? You become a king by exercising or implementing or revealing from top to bottom the highest part of who you are and what you are, the neshama, the highest soul part of us, which is embedded in the moach, in the brain, and bringing it down. and then affecting the lev, the heart, what we desire, our aspirations, and the kaved, even our actions, even the most basic physical needs of eating, of breathing, of sleeping, of procreating, that is all governed from top to bottom, from the highest part, and is enveloped by the neshama, is enveloped by the ruach, is captivated by the thought, and is controlled and governed by the neshama all the way down to our most basic need. And incidentally, the blood is associated with what? With food and drink. Food and drink. How do you produce more blood? Food and drink. You are what you eat is exactly that in accordance with the Torah. Ki adam hu hanefesh. For the blood is the life soul. What you eat turns you into what you are. That's why the Torah prohibits us to eat particular things. That's why the Torah prohibits us to eat hunting birds, in order that we don't acquire the attribute of akhzarut. How do you say akhzarut? Cruelty. You are what you eat. And then there are certain animals that have negative spiritual qualities, that are bound in impurity. And the Almighty does not want us to be associated, that the blood is associated with impurity. And then thus the blood turns to who we are, because if you have a sore, if you have a cut, God forbid, what happens? What goes to heal it? What's the first thing that goes there and dries and then turns back to skin? The blood. Not the other way around. Not that our desires, not that our physical side controls our aspirations, our desires, what we want to do, how we want to lead our lives, and then utilize the brain how to go about it. Because if you lose control over yourself, the brain simply becomes no longer the expression of the highest part of us, of the soul. It simply becomes a tool to get to what you want. I was going to say something, but I forgot. In that regard. So it can't work the other way around. It can't work that the brain, it simply becomes the tool. Oh, this is what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say is the Gemara tells us that the tzaddikim, their heart is in their domain, is in their control. But the wicked, they are controlled by their desires. The Gemara tells us that what defines a righteous man? His self-mastery and control, exercise of control and discipline. The wicked can't help himself. That's why another Gemara says, Reshaim meleim haratot. The wicked are always filled with regret, because they know what they did was wrong. Oh, God, again I did this. Again I didn't take out the garbage. Again I spoke ill of another person. Again I got angry and I went and I did this and I broke the plates and this and that. And then you regret it. But you knew it was wrong. You know it's wrong today, right? So let's say you don't know it's wrong. You didn't know it's wrong before you did it. But now you see the outcome of it. Like a child, that's how a child learns. He sees. He sees the outcome. He sees the response of the parents. I remember the first time Hannah did a tantrum. She was almost 2 years old. She decided to have a tantrum. So I don't know what it was. She wanted something, she didn't get something. Or she spread herself on the floor and started crying. And I started laughing. I think I shocked her. What do you mean? You shouldn't be crying. You shouldn't be giving me what I want. I started to laugh. And of course, She didn't understand what I said, but I basically said, been there, done that, forget it, it's not going to work. It just ain't going to work. Been there, done that. So we know these tricks, they're not going to work on us anymore. So a child learns, hey, that didn't work. No point in me throwing myself on the floor, hurting my chin perhaps, or getting my shirt dirty. Now my parents are going to have to go and change me. That's uncomfortable. Take off the the tights and put them back on. Kids don't like that. I don't like it either. The truth is, my wife would probably do the changing. I wouldn't bother. I would just put a coat on. Put a coat. Oh, but Abba, it's not cold. No, it's going to be cold. The weatherman said it's cold. Put the coat on. I had lunch today, and I sort of stained my shirt. So what does a man do? What does my son suggest? And I was rushing. I had to go to a funeral, and my son says, "Oh, but don't worry, just wear a tie." And I said, you're so right, but what happens if it's windy and the tie moves? I think I better go and change the shirt. So a child learns the consequences. You see that, the child spreads itself and cries and exerts so much energy, and all the father does was laugh. Well, they're not going to do that anymore. And she didn't. But if I would have gone, "Oh, what's wrong? Oh, yes, I will give you the lolly. I'll give you 10 lollies. Just be quiet." And she'll do it again and again and again. Then she'll have me wrapped around her finger, total control of me. That's exactly what happens with the wicked. The wicked, you know what the outcome is. You saw what the consequences are. The consequences are you hurt someone's feeling. The consequences are is you ruined a relationship. The consequences are is you took from someone. How are you going to fix that? You stole from someone. How are you going to fix that now? So you regret it because you know it's wrong. You saw the outcome. If you didn't know it before, you know it now. So the Gemara says, Reshaim Meleim Haratot, they're full of regrets. What do you mean? What do you have to regret? They used to have a saying that we're in the month of Elul. One of the ways to arouse atonement is by giving a lot of charity. We work hard, don't we, for our money. So when you give a part of you, it took you a lot of effort. That's what kids don't realize. They think you just take it out of the pocket, but can I have $20? Can I have $50? It just comes out effortlessly, but he doesn't know how much sweat went into getting that $20 or that $50. I sweated to get that $50, but he thinks, just comes out of the pocket effortlessly, Took 2.5 seconds. Yeah, it took an hour and a half to earn it, and the government took a part of that too. So one of the ways to atone is by giving charity. You give charity. Also, another thing is you give life to another person. In the merit of that, God should give us life. You show care and concern for God's creatures. This will arouse, remember we said before about correspondence, this will arouse God's love and compassion upon us when we may, God forbid, have not been necessarily deserving of it. So we give charity. So someone once asked a question, so what happens if you don't have money to give charity? How can you atone for the sins? So the rabbi said, well, don't sin. You can't afford to sin. You can't afford to sin. A wicked person, you saw what it's done. You can't afford to break relationships like that. How many people's lives have been ruined? How many relationships have been ruined because a person couldn't help himself? What about the gambler? Can't help himself. He's losing his house. He's losing his house. He just lost his car. And he may lose his house now. May lose his house, may lose his marriage. He can't help himself. He knows, he regrets it, but then he's back into it again. But you saw what you did. You're full of regrets because you don't have control. And then all that the mind does is he finds the ways. Where can I get money? What can I pawn off? How can I do it? And he finds and he navigates himself how to be able to get what he wants, what he desires. At that moment, he's lost total control. The brain no longer has control. The neshama is no longer in control. He loses spiritual sensitivity. He's no longer in control. He's no longer a melech. And the Torah tells us, be a melech. Som tasim alecha melech. Place a king upon yourself. Am Segula, the chosen nation, is chosen because you have the ability to be able to master control over yourself. So, we have the brain, the mind, which is the essence and the ultimate of the seat of the brain, which exists there and can master control. And we have the kaved, the liver, that is associated with the most base and crass part of life, of what we are. And then we have the middle. What's the middle? The heart. Why is the heart in the middle? Because, what does it say in the Shema? It says in Shema, Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha bechol levavecha. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart. Bechol libcha. The Torah should have said, with all of your heart, libcha. Not levavecha. Why levavecha? Why double bet there? Why double bet? Vayitzer et ha'adam. God says, and he formed, the Torah says, he formed man. Uses 2 letters yud. There's an extra yud there. It doesn't belong there. Vayitzer. Vayitzer is spelled with 1 yud. Why 2 yuds? God formed man with vayitzer. He formed with a yetzer. With 2 yetzers. 2 yetzarim. 2 inclinations. Yetzer tov, v'yetzer hara. God implanted within us desire for good, desire for bad. And therefore, when it says in the Shema, you should love the Lord your God with all of your heart, not only just your good part of your heart, because we have 2 dimensions of the heart. We have what the Kabbalists refer to as the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart. The one that is more filled with air or not blood, and the one that is filled with blood. The one that is filled with blood is more drawn towards physical temptation and desires, towards material desires and satisfaction and lust, etc. The right side is associated with more higher, nobler desires, the Yetzer Tov, the more spiritual dimension of who we are, or what we can be. And that's why it says, Bechol levavecha, b'shnei yitzrecha, the Gemara says, with both of your inclinations. Because we can in fact harness the power of desire to desire good things. Even the evil inclination is a powerful tool. And we can harness the evil inclination to serve God. By using the same level, I always tell my children, how many football stars are there? How many soccer players, you know? And they rattle off, Minicello, Bachichi, da-da, Messi, Manu, that one, this one from Spain, from Rio Madrid, or whatever you call it, east, south, bang, 50, 60 players. They know who they are, they know their jersey, they know when they're born, they know everything about them. Ribono shel Olam. I said, very good. So I see you have a good memory when you want to. All right, name me 50 sages from the Gemara, from the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon, and they go on. And that's only 22. Come on, keep on going. Now tell me a little bit about, once I exhausted, now tell me a little bit about Rabbi Yossi. What do you know about him? Where did he live? Do you know where he lived? Do you know who he played for? Yes, he played for Tzfat, he played for Tiberia, he played for Yerushalayim. And I tell him, look, you have the ability to memorize things. Look at what passion you have for the soccer players, you know everything about it. How can you translate that passion to Torah, to mitzvot, to a thirst for knowledge? You can take that part of the Yetzer Hara and also bring it under the control of the intellect, of the mind, of the neshama, of the higher part of us. But what's interesting to note is how the heart which is associated with which part of the soul did we say before? Who remembers? Ruach. Ruach. The heart or the speech or the emotions is Ruach. The seat of the Ruach is in the heart. Listen to this, very interesting. Very interesting how the expression Ruach in the Torah we find in different places in the Torah. For example, you find the concept of Ruach HaKodesh. He's endowed with the divine, with the Holy Spirit. If someone is endowed with the Holy Spirit, means to say he's almost akin to a prophet. He has this supernatural, uncanny ability to zone in and be intuitive spiritually, almost like know what's going to happen, like a prophet. Then we have what's called Ruach HaTumah or Ruach Tumah, the spirit of impurity. Or the Gemara, for example, in Masechet Sotah says, "En adam hoteh ela im nichnas bo ruach shtut." A person doesn't sin only if the spirit of folly enters him and captivates him. At that moment, he's not saying, "I want this, I want it now, I want to do it, I want to get angry." He knows it's not sane, it's not normal, it's not productive, it's destructive. Ruach shtut, the Gemara calls it, the spirit. Notice it calls it a spirit of folly. Or for example, shfal ruach. Shfal ruach means someone who's a very lowly spirit, someone who's very humbled. Or for example, ruach gevoha, someone has a very arrogant spirit. So we see the concept of ruach in terminology of the Torah or of the sages or of the prophets. The ruach could be for good or for bad. So the heart stands in the middle, where the kaved, where the liver or the nefesh represents just physical dimension, where the intellect or the mind represents the more spiritual, the more noble part of us, the heart's in the middle. And maybe that's what defines man. Maybe that's why the Torah defines man with, as Onkelos says, with man, nefesh haya, man became a living being. Onkelos says, a speaking being. Ruach haya. Which means the speaking part of us, the emotion part of us, is really what defines us. Why? Why? Because the mind, we're born with a mind that is pure, that is crystal clear. It is the ruach, the heart, that can go either way. And therefore what defines us is the choices that we make. The choices that we make. Do we choose to be a king? Do we choose to have desires and aspirations for spirituality? Do we want to have a ruach shefela, a shfal ruach? Do we want to be humble and low? Do we want to be ruach gevoha? We want to be arrogant. Do you want to have a ruach hakodesh, a spirit of holiness, or ruach kinah, or a spirit of desire, temptation, or jealousy? This is dependent upon how we want to lead our lives. And that's why the heart is in the middle, both in regards to relations to the brain and the liver, but also in the middle of our whole, the center of our life, because that defines really who we are and what we're going to be. So we will continue next week, which will really expand upon this in a very, very interesting way of how, when you turn the letters around, what does it mean? And what does it mean if, God forbid, you follow the reverse order? You do not follow, you're not a melech. What happens then? Very interesting stuff. So please come next week.